The man he chose at 16 betrayed him 5 years later. LeBron's trust issues explained. Imagine being a 16-year-old kid forced to choose the person who will control your entire career. Agent, manager, mentor, everything. Someone who will negotiate every contract, manage every dollar, guide every decision. Someone who could make you or break you. LeBron James made that choice in 2002, but the person he chose would betray him 5 years later in a way that changed him forever. And that betrayal explains why LeBron, even as a billionaire at the peak of his power, trusts almost no one. Before we dive into the story, subscribing to my channel is very important to me. Don't forget to subscribe. Thank you in advance. Enjoy the show. Summer 2002. Akron, Ohio. LeBron James was 17 years old, about to enter his senior year of high school at St. Vincent St. Mary, and already one of the most famous teenagers in America. Actually, famous doesn't quite capture it. He was a phenomenon, a cultural moment, someone whose high school basketball games were drawing more attention than most college programs. Sports Illustrated had just put him on their cover with the headline, "The Chosen One," an enormous amount of pressure to place on a teenager's shoulders. ESPN was televising his high school games nationally, something that had never been done before. Scouts from every major college basketball program were trying to recruit him, even though everyone knew he'd skip college entirely and go straight to the NBA. Shoe companies, Nike, Adidas, Reebok, were already circling like sharks, preparing offers that would make him a multi-millionaire before he ever played a single professional game. But LeBron had a problem that most 17-year-olds don't face. A problem that came with being a commodity before he was legally an adult. He needed to choose someone to manage his inevitable transition to professional basketball and the enormous, life-changing wealth that would come with it. He needed representation, he needed protection, he needed guidance, he needed an adult he could trust absolutely in a world where everyone, and I mean everyone, wanted something from him, where every conversation had an angle, where every friendly gesture might be calculated, where genuine care was almost impossible to distinguish from strategic positioning. His mother Gloria was doing her best, trying to protect her son while navigating waters she'd never imagined swimming in. She'd raised LeBron alone, survived poverty and homelessness with him, worked multiple jobs to keep them fed, made sacrifices that most parents never have to make. But she had no experience navigating the brutal, predatory business of professional sports. She knew she was out of her depth. She knew LeBron needed someone sophisticated, someone who understood contracts and negotiations and the ways young athletes get exploited, someone who could protect him from the vultures. That's when Eddie Jackson entered their lives. And for 5 years, everything seemed perfect. Eddie seemed like the answer to every concern, the solution to every problem, until it wasn't, until everything fell apart in the most devastating way possible. But to understand how the betrayal happened, how it was possible for someone to fool LeBron and Gloria so completely for so long, you need to understand who Eddie Jackson was and why LeBron trusted him so completely. Because the trust wasn't built on naivety. It was built on something that seemed much more solid: shared experience, shared background, and what appeared to be genuine care. Wait. Because Eddie Jackson's background and his pitch to the James family explain why LeBron chose him and why the eventual betrayal cut so devastatingly deep. Eddie Jackson was 38 years old in 2002, a former drug dealer who'd spent time in prison in the 1990s, but had supposedly turned his life around. He'd grown up in Akron, just like LeBron, in the same rough neighborhoods, facing the same challenges. He knew what poverty looked like, he knew what it meant to struggle, and critically, he'd known Gloria James for years. They'd run in the same circles, had mutual friends, shared history in Akron's black community. When Eddie approached Gloria in 2002 with an offer to help manage LeBron's business affairs, it wasn't like the slick agents from New York or Los Angeles who were sending glossy packages and making promises about mansions and millions. Eddie's pitch was different, more personal, more rooted in their shared experience. "Gloria, you know me," Eddie said during one of their early conversations, sitting in Gloria's small apartment in Akron. "I'm from here. I grew up where you grew up. I know what it's like to have nothing and see your kid have a chance at everything. These other people, they don't care about LeBron. They see dollar signs. They see their commission. But I see a kid from Akron who deserves someone in his corner who actually cares about him as a person, not just as a paycheck." It was exactly what Gloria wanted to hear. And more importantly, it felt authentic in a way that the corporate pitches didn't. Eddie wasn't asking to be LeBron's official agent. They both knew he wasn't qualified for that. Instead, he positioned himself as a business manager and advisor, someone who would work alongside whatever agent they eventually chose, someone who would protect the family's interests, someone who would be their eyes and ears in negotiations. "I'm not trying to get rich off you," Eddie told them. "I just want to help. I want to make sure nobody takes advantage of you the way people get taken advantage of in this business." LeBron was skeptical at first. Even at 17, he had good instincts about people, had developed a radar for phoniness from years of people trying to use him. But Eddie seemed different. Eddie talked about community, about staying rooted in Akron, about not forgetting where you came from. He talked about the dangers of the sports industry, how young athletes get exploited, how important it was to have someone you could really trust. And crucially, Eddie didn't ask for anything up front. He said he'd work for them, help them navigate the business landscape, and they could figure out compensation later, once LeBron turned pro and money started coming in. "We're family," Eddie would say. "Family takes care of family." Over the next several months, Eddie became deeply embedded in LeBron's life. He attended games, he met with potential agents on their behalf, he gave advice on everything from endorsement offers to media strategy. He positioned himself not as an employee, but as family, as a father figure, as the responsible adult who would protect them from a predatory industry. Gloria trusted him completely, and gradually, so did LeBron, because Eddie seemed to be exactly what he claimed to be, someone who genuinely cared, who was there not for money, but because he wanted to help someone from his community succeed. By the time LeBron was drafted first overall by the Cleveland Cavaliers in June 2003, Eddie Jackson was firmly established as part of LeBron's inner circle. And when LeBron signed his first major endorsement deal with Nike, a 7-year, $90 million contract that was unprecedented for someone who'd never played a professional game, Eddie was there, advising on the negotiations, celebrating the signing, positioning himself as a key part of the team that had made it all possible. What nobody knew at the time was that Eddie Jackson was playing a much longer game, and that game would end in betrayal. Hold on. Because what happened between 2003 and 2007, the years when LeBron thought he could trust Eddie completely, set up the devastating betrayal that would change how LeBron viewed relationships forever. 2003, 2007. The early Cleveland years. LeBron's first few years in the NBA were exactly what everyone had predicted, and more: immediate, undeniable superstardom. He won Rookie of the Year in his first season, averaging 20.9 points per game at just 18 years old. He made all-star teams in his second and third years. He led the Cavaliers to the playoffs repeatedly, carrying teams that weren't particularly talented around him. The money poured in like a flood, not just from his NBA salary, which was substantial, but from endorsements with Nike, Sprite, Powerade, Publicis, Upper Deck, and others. By 2007, LeBron James was making approximately $25 to $30 million per year in combined salary and endorsements, an astronomical amount for someone still in his early 20s. And through it all, through every contract negotiation, and every business decision, and every endorsement deal, Eddie Jackson was there. He'd successfully positioned himself as LeBron's business manager, though his exact role was deliberately vague, and his actual qualifications for the position were questionable at best. But LeBron trusted him implicitly, completely. Eddie had been there from the beginning, from before the fame and the money. Eddie was from Akron. Eddie knew the family. Eddie understood where they came from. Eddie had proven himself loyal when they had nothing, so surely he'd remain loyal now that they had everything. Eddie's responsibilities and access grew proportionally as LeBron's empire grew. He helped manage LeBron's finances, weighing in on investment decisions and major purchases. He had input on business decisions, sitting in on meetings with lawyers and accountants. He had direct access to LeBron's bank accounts, able to make transfers and withdrawals as needed for business expenses. He was involved in real estate purchases, helping LeBron buy properties in Cleveland and Akron. He traveled with the team sometimes when the Cavaliers played away games. He was at family dinners and holiday celebrations. He was, by absolutely all outward appearances, part of the inner circle, trusted completely and without reservation. LeBron would later describe these years as a period of dangerous naivety. "I thought loyalty was automatic," he said in a rare moment of candor years later. "I thought if someone was there when you had nothing, they'd stay loyal when you had everything. I didn't understand yet that for some people, seeing you succeed just makes them want to take from you even more." But Eddie Jackson had secrets that LeBron didn't know about. Actually, he had multiple secrets, layers of deception that would eventually all collapse together, and those secrets would ultimately destroy the relationship and teach LeBron a lesson he'd carry for the rest of his life about the nature of trust. First, Eddie had never actually stopped his involvement in illegal activities and criminal enterprises. While he presented himself publicly as a reformed ex-dealer who'd turned his life around and become a legitimate businessman, he was still deeply connected to illegal operations in Akron. He was still involved with dangerous people from his past life, people involved in drug trafficking and other criminal enterprises. And critically, he was using his association with LeBron James, using LeBron's name, using LeBron's money, using LeBron's reputation to facilitate and finance these activities. He was essentially using LeBron as an unwitting shield for criminal behavior. Second, and more directly damaging to LeBron personally, Eddie was stealing, systematically, consistently, deliberately, for years, He was taking money from LeBron's various accounts, justifying the withdrawals as business expenses or management fees or operational costs, but keeping far more than any legitimate business manager would ever be entitled to. The amounts were carefully calculated, large enough to add up to millions over time, but small enough that they wouldn't immediately trigger alarm bells in the complex web of LeBron's finances, which involved multiple accounts, multiple business entities, multiple streams of income. Third, Eddie was using his position in LeBron's inner circle for personal gain in ways that went far beyond simple theft. He was accepting money from people who wanted access to LeBron, essentially selling access to one of the most famous athletes in the world. He was providing information about LeBron's schedule, his plans, his private business dealings to people who had no right to that information. He was, in essence, exploiting his position as a trusted insider for profit in multiple different ways simultaneously. But LeBron didn't know any of this. He trusted Eddie. He considered Eddie family. He gave Eddie access to everything because he believed Eddie had earned that trust through years of loyalty. And that trust would continue, unquestioned and absolute, until 2007, when everything came crashing down in the most painful, public, humiliating way possible. Because the moment LeBron discovered the betrayal, the exact circumstances of how he found out reveals something important about how he processes relationships, trust, and the devastating realization that someone you love has been using you. Spring 2007, Cleveland, Ohio. LeBron James was 22 years old, and in the midst of what was, up to that point, the best season of his young but already legendary career. He'd just led the Cleveland Cavaliers to their first ever NBA Finals appearance, an achievement that seemed almost impossible given the mediocre talent surrounding him on the roster. He'd carried the team on his back through the Eastern Conference playoffs in a performance that established him definitively as one of the league's absolute elite players, no longer just a promising young star, but a genuine superstar capable of willing his team to victory. Everything seemed to be going perfectly in his life. His career was ascending rapidly. His finances were secure and growing. His inner circle felt solid and trustworthy. His relationship with his mother was strong. His foundation in Akron was doing good work. Or so he thought. Or so it appeared from the outside. The discovery of Eddie Jackson's betrayal didn't come from LeBron's team conducting an internal audit. It didn't come from a careful review of finances by suspicious accountants. It didn't come from LeBron or Gloria, noticing discrepancies or having doubts. It came from completely outside their world, from law enforcement, from people who'd been investigating Eddie Jackson for reasons that had nothing to do with LeBron initially. In May 2007, 2 FBI agents contacted LeBron's legal team with information that would shatter everything. They requested an immediate confidential meeting. When LeBron's lawyers asked what it was about, the agents would only say it concerned criminal activity involving someone in Mr. James's inner circle. The vagueness was terrifying. The meeting took place in a conference room at a downtown Cleveland law office. 2 FBI agents, 3 of LeBron's lawyers, and the information they presented was devastating, world-shattering, almost incomprehensible. Eddie Jackson was under federal investigation for drug trafficking and money laundering. The investigation had been ongoing for several months, building a case through wiretaps, surveillance, informant testimony, and financial records. And during the course of that investigation, agents had uncovered something that required them to notify LeBron. Eddie had been systematically using LeBron's money to fund illegal drug operations. The FBI agents laid out the evidence methodically, professionally, almost clinically. Bank records showing suspicious transfers from LeBron's accounts to shell companies that Eddie controlled. Wiretap recordings where Eddie bragged about his access to LeBron's money. Testimony from informants in the drug world who described Eddie as a major player who'd used his connection to a famous athlete to expand his operations and gain credibility. Paper trails showing how Eddie had funneled money from LeBron's business accounts into real estate purchases that were fronts for drug distribution networks. The amounts were staggering, almost impossible to comprehend. Over the course of approximately 4 years, Eddie Jackson had taken somewhere between 3.5 and 4 billion from LeBron. The exact figure was difficult to determine because of how skillfully Eddie had hidden the transactions, how cleverly he'd disguised theft as legitimate business expenses, but the FBI's forensic accountants were confident it was in that range. Millions of dollars, stolen over years, right under everyone's noses. But worse than the money, far worse than the financial theft, was the betrayal of trust and the way Eddie had used LeBron's name and reputation. Eddie had sat at LeBron's dinner table countless times, had been invited to family celebrations and private moments, had been called family by both LeBron and Gloria, had positioned himself as someone who was there out of genuine care and concern rather than self-interest. And all of it had been a calculated, deliberate lie from the very beginning. All of it had been a long con executed by someone who saw a naive teenager and his struggling mother as marks to be exploited, as resources to be extracted, as tools to be used for his own criminal enterprises. LeBron's initial reaction when his lawyers called him to explain what the FBI had revealed, according to people who were with him when he got the news, was complete and utter denial. Psychological defense mechanisms kicked in immediately. "There has to be a mistake," he said, his voice shaking. "There has to be some explanation. Eddie wouldn't do this. I know him. He's been with us from the very beginning. Before any of this. Before the money. Before the fame. He was there when we had nothing." His lawyers had to walk him through the evidence multiple times. Bank statements, transaction records, wiretap transcripts, witness testimony, before he could begin to accept the reality of what had happened. And when he finally did accept it, when the truth finally penetrated through the layers of denial and disbelief, something fundamental broke inside him. Not his spirit. LeBron was far too strong, far too resilient for that. Not his drive or ambition, or competitive fire, but something more subtle and more permanent, his ability to trust people at face value. His willingness to believe that someone could care about him for who he was, rather than what they could extract from him. How long? LeBron asked his lawyers, his voice hollow and distant. How long was he doing this? Based on the financial records, probably since 2003, possibly earlier, but definitely by 2003. So from the beginning, from the very beginning, this was always the plan. It appears so, yes. The legal proceedings moved quickly once the FBI's investigation became public. Eddie Jackson was arrested in June 2007 on federal charges including drug trafficking, money laundering, wire fraud, and theft. The arrest made headlines in Cleveland and Akron, though most media coverage focused on the drug charges rather than his connection to LeBron, largely because LeBron's legal team moved aggressively to keep his name out of it as much as possible. Eddie pleaded not guilty initially, apparently believing he could fight the charges or cut a deal that would minimize his sentence. But the evidence was overwhelming. Wiretaps, bank records, witness testimony, surveillance footage. The federal prosecutors had built an airtight case. Eventually, after months of legal maneuvering, Eddie accepted a plea deal that resulted in a prison sentence of 10 years in federal prison. During the investigation and the trial proceedings, more painful details emerged that made the betrayal even more devastating and personal. Eddie had been bragging to people in Akron about his access to LeBron, about how he was getting rich off the King's money. He'd been using LeBron's name to gain credibility and protection in illegal circles, essentially using LeBron's reputation as a shield for criminal activities that could have damaged LeBron's image if they'd been more directly connected to him in the public mind. He'd been taking money from various people who wanted to get close to LeBron, people who wanted tickets to games, people who wanted autographs, people who wanted business meetings, essentially selling access and insider information as if it were a commodity to be traded. And perhaps most painfully, Eddie had been laughing about it with his criminal associates. Wiretap transcripts included conversations where Eddie mocked LeBron and Gloria for being naive, for trusting him so completely, for being so easy to manipulate. "They think I'm family," Eddie said in one recorded phone call that prosecutors played during the proceedings. "They actually think I care about them. It's the easiest money I've ever made." LeBron never spoke to Eddie Jackson again after learning the full truth. Not during the investigation, not during the trial, not during sentencing. Never. The relationship was completely, irrevocably severed the moment the evidence became undeniable. When federal prosecutors asked if LeBron wanted to give a victim impact statement at Eddie's sentencing hearing, an opportunity to address the court and Eddie directly about how the crimes had affected him, LeBron declined. He wanted nothing more to do with the man who'd betrayed him so completely. He didn't want to give Eddie the satisfaction of seeing how much damage he'd done. He didn't want to be in the same room with him ever again, but the damage was done, and it went far, far deeper than the money that had been stolen, or the legal proceedings, or the public embarrassment of having been fooled. The damage was psychological, emotional, fundamental to how LeBron would approach relationships for the rest of his life. Gloria blamed herself intensely. The guilt consumed her. She'd been the one who'd known Eddie first, who'd vouched for him, who'd brought him into their lives. She'd been the one who'd trusted him initially, and convinced LeBron to trust him too. And now her son had lost millions of dollars, and more importantly, had learned a terrible lesson about human nature because of her mistake in judgment. "Baby, I'm so sorry," she told LeBron one night, a few weeks after Eddie's arrest, both of them sitting in LeBron's Cleveland home, the weight of the betrayal hanging between them. "This is my fault. I should have seen through him. I should have protected you better." But LeBron didn't blame his mother. He couldn't. She'd been trying to protect him, trying to find someone they could trust in a world full of predators. "It's not your fault, Mom," he said, though his voice was tired and sad in a way she'd never heard before. "Eddie fooled both of us. That's what con artists do. They're good at it. That's literally their skill, making people trust them, who shouldn't. But you were so young. You were just a kid trying to navigate all this, and I brought someone into our lives who hurt you. Mom, stop. We both made the choice to trust him. And you know what? I'm glad it happened when I was 22, instead of later when it could have been even worse. Eddie taught me something important, something I needed to learn, that trust has to be earned over years, not given freely, just because someone says the right things or seems like they care. Hold on, because what happened after the betrayal, the specific changes in how LeBron restructured his life and relationships, explains not just the person he became, but why he operates the way he does even today, nearly 2 decades later. But the damage was done, and it went far deeper than the money that had been stolen. Hold on, because what happened after the betrayal, the changes in how LeBron structured his life and relationships, explains the person he became, and why he operates the way he does today. After Eddie Jackson's betrayal became public in 2007, LeBron went into damage control mode. His lawyers secured the return of some, though not all, of the stolen money. His business team restructured his finances with much more oversight and multiple layers of checks and balances. His accountants implemented new systems to prevent anyone from having the kind of unfettered access that Eddie had enjoyed. But the bigger changes were psychological and interpersonal. LeBron fundamentally reconsidered who he could trust and how trust should be earned. First, he drastically reduced his inner circle. People who'd been around for years but whose loyalty was questionable were cut off. LeBron's team became smaller, more insular, more carefully vetted. Access to LeBron James became one of the most carefully guarded things in professional sports. Second, LeBron developed what people close to him describe as walls. He became much more guarded in personal interactions, much less willing to let people see vulnerability, much more careful about who got close to him emotionally. Friends from childhood who'd known him before fame found that he was different, more distant, harder to reach. Third, and perhaps most importantly, LeBron changed how he approached business relationships. Instead of relying on informal arrangements and personal trust like he'd done with Eddie, everything became contractual, formal, documented. Even family members who worked for him now had written contracts specifying exactly what they did and how much they were paid. Nothing was based on handshakes or trust anymore. Everything was in writing, everything was auditable, everything was structured to prevent another Eddie Jackson situation. His mother Gloria, who blamed herself for trusting Eddie and bringing him into their lives, tried to talk to LeBron about it several times in the months after the betrayal. "Baby, you can't let this make you bitter," she told him. "You can't let one bad person make you stop trusting everyone." But LeBron had learned a different lesson. "It's not about being bitter, Mom," he replied. "It's about being smart. Eddie taught me that trust has to be earned over years, not given freely just because someone says the right things or seems like they care. From now on, actions matter, consistency matters, time matters, words don't mean anything." This new philosophy affected all of LeBron's relationships going forward. When he eventually left Cleveland for Miami in 2010, part of his reasoning was about getting away from everyone who'd known him when he was younger and more naive, when he trusted people like Eddie Jackson. Miami represented a fresh start, a place where he could build relationships on his terms. With his new understanding of how trust works, his friendships became more transactional. Even with teammates he genuinely liked, there was always a distance, always a sense that LeBron was holding something back. Dwayne Wade, one of his closest friends in the league, once said in an interview, "Even after we won championships together, even after everything we went through, I always felt like there was a part of LeBron I didn't really know, like he kept the real him locked away where nobody could get to it." His business partnerships became more carefully structured. When LeBron started investing in companies and building his business empire, every deal was scrutinized, not just for financial return, but for the character of the people involved. Background checks, references, long courtship periods before any commitment. Nothing was rushed. Nobody got the benefit of the doubt. Even his relationship with Rich Paul, his longtime agent and friend who became one of the most powerful agents in the NBA, was built on years of proving loyalty before LeBron truly trusted him. Rich Paul had to demonstrate consistency, reliability, and genuine care over many years before LeBron let him into the inner circle. And even then, the relationship was carefully structured with contracts and clear boundaries. The Eddie Jackson betrayal fundamentally changed how LeBron James operated in the world, and the effects of that change are visible in everything he's done since 2007. But here's what's most interesting. LeBron has never publicly discussed the Eddie Jackson situation in detail. He's never given interviews about it. He's never written about it in his carefully controlled social media presence. When reporters have asked him about trust and relationships over the years, he's given vague answers about learning from experience and protecting yourself in this business. But he's never named Eddie Jackson or explained what actually happened. Why? Because talking about it would mean admitting vulnerability. It would mean acknowledging that he was fooled, that he trusted the wrong person, that despite his intelligence and his instincts, he was betrayed by someone he considered family. And LeBron's public persona, the carefully constructed image of the king who's always in control, always right, always successful, can't accommodate that kind of admission. But people close to LeBron know the Eddie Jackson story. They know it's the defining moment that explains why LeBron is the way he is, why he doesn't trust easily, why his inner circle is so small, why everything is so carefully controlled and managed, why even acts of genuine kindness from LeBron often feel somewhat transactional and distant. That whole situation with Eddie broke something in him, one former teammate told a reporter off the record years later. Not in a dramatic way where he became a different person, but in a subtle way where he just stopped believing that people could be in his life without wanting something from him. And once you see the world that way, it's really hard to unsee it. In 2015, 8 years after Eddie Jackson went to prison, he was released on parole. One of the conditions of his release was that he couldn't contact LeBron James directly or indirectly. But within weeks of his release, Eddie gave an interview to a small Akron newspaper. In it, he tried to rehabilitate his image and minimize what he'd done. "I made mistakes," Eddie said in the interview, "but I was also there for LeBron when nobody else was. I helped him and Gloria navigate a complicated world when they didn't know how. The situation got complicated. I made some bad choices, but to act like I didn't do anything positive for him is wrong." When LeBron's team was asked if he had any response to Eddie's comments, the statement was brief and cold. "Mr. James has no comment on this person and requests media not contact him about this matter." But privately, according to people who know LeBron, the interview enraged him. Because Eddie was trying to rewrite history, trying to position himself as someone who'd been unfairly persecuted rather than someone who'd deliberately betrayed trust for profit. The fact that Eddie still didn't seem to understand the magnitude of what he'd done, still didn't show genuine remorse, only reinforced LeBron's belief that his post-2007 approach to trust and relationships was correct. Today, in 2024, LeBron James is 39 years old, a billionaire, one of the greatest basketball players in history, and someone with an empire that extends far beyond sports. And he's still operating with the same philosophy he developed after the Eddie Jackson betrayal. Trust must be earned over years, not given freely. Relationships must be carefully managed. Vulnerability must be protected. Emotional distance must be maintained. Is it sad? Maybe. It means LeBron has fewer genuinely close relationships than he might otherwise have. It means he carries a guardedness that can sometimes read as coldness or arrogance. It means he's missed out on connections that could have been meaningful because he couldn't fully open up. But from LeBron's perspective, it's necessary. Because Eddie Jackson taught him a lesson that he's never forgotten, that trust, once betrayed, is almost impossible to rebuild. That people will use your success against you if given the chance. That even someone who seems like family, who's been there from the beginning, who says all the right things, can be playing a long con. The man LeBron chose at 16 betrayed him 5 years later, and that betrayal shaped the next 17 years of his life, determining how he relates to people, how he structures relationships, how he protects himself emotionally. Can money buy trust? No. Can fame protect you from betrayal? No. Can success insulate you from the pain of being used by someone you considered family? Absolutely not. LeBron James learned all of this the hard way in 2007, and he's never forgotten it. That's why, if you watch LeBron carefully, you'll notice he keeps everyone at a distance. That's why his friendships seem somewhat surface level. That's why even his most generous acts of charity and community support feel somewhat calculated and transactional. That's why he controls his image so carefully and shares so little of his real self, because 16-year-old LeBron trusted Eddie Jackson completely, and that trust cost him millions of dollars. Yes, but more importantly, it cost him something far more valuable, his ability to believe that people could care about him for who he was, rather than what he could do for them. The betrayal of 2007 explains the LeBron James of today, guarded, careful, trusting almost no one, building an empire but keeping it all behind walls that very few people are allowed to breach. And maybe, in the world LeBron inhabits, that's the only way to survive.